Yes,
Something good.
one of the two.
Okay, so it was pointed out to me that maybe we shouldn't be learning on Nittelnacht. And I responded, I don't think anyone in my whole life has ever confused me for a chassid. I just, so we're gonna learn on Nittelnacht because we should learn, and a Jew's wayward not birthday should not prevent us from learning. So the topics for tonight, again, they're short tshuvas, so we get to do two of them. Is hair coverings for men and a woman's singing voice, and what about the radio? Is it the same as live? So they're two fundamentally, what?
Memorex, if you're old enough to remember the commercials.
Memorex?
Memorex.
Is it live or is it
Memorex.
Memorex. I guess I'm not old
Is
enough.
it
Sorry.
live or is it Memorex?
Apologize.
You're not
Sorry
old
there.
enough, Rabbi.
What?
Anyone who remembers that commercial is dating themselves.
Okay, so again, the first question is really a question about yarmulkes. So I'll tell you, there was a spot inspection of JSOR, and one of the questions that they asked some of the mashgichim was, do you wear a yarmulke out in the street? Which is kind of a fascinating question in this community. I think if you went to Brooklyn or Queens and you asked that question and they said no, you would be, all right, you can't be a mashgiach. I mean, you're out. When I grew up in Queens, somebody who wasn't wearing a yarmulke wasn't affiliated. Just, you wore a yarmulke and that's what it was. In this community, right, certainly if the mashgichim are from Deal and not from Lakewood, that's a much more open question, right? I don't know that in the Syrian community, wearing a yarmulke defines your orthodoxy the same way it does in, let's say, standard Ashkenaz community. They didn't get it. The guy that asked the question, they didn't get it. They couldn't understand it. It just, I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't know what the end of that story is, but I guess we're all still eating the food, so it's good. But there are, where does it come from? That's the first question. Right, so again, the question is as follows: is covering one's head, right? It's funny because most of these questions revolve around women's hair covering. This is a question about men's hair covering, right? Is covering one's head mechuyav mitzad hadin? Is it obligatory, right? Halachically, is it a halacha that you have to wear a yarmulke or a hat or whatever? Right, and if so, where is this hinted to in the Torah, and why? So that again, I like his honesty, right? And the first thing he tells you is a formal prohibition of going with your head uncovered is neither explicit anywhere in the Gemara or the Shulchan Aruch. It simply doesn't exist. You will not find, I mean, we'll see the two Gemaras that hint at the value of head covering, but a formal prohibition on Isser, it doesn't exist, right? Which is fascinating. We got to keep that in mind as we go through this tshuva to see where we end up, right? But that's the opening line, and that should set the tone for the tshuva. There is no prohibition on the books anywhere in the Gemara or in the Shulchan Aruch. Right. Now,
No prohibition and no requirement. Prohibition against not wearing it.
right. Well, they would be two halves of. Right, and let's forget during davening there are some halachos, but I'm talking about I'm walking in the street, I'm walking my dog, not davening mincha when I'm walking my dog.
And not eating. The Syrians put it on to eat too.
Not so much anymore.
No?
I'll tell you a funny story. So there was a guy who's very friendly with Brian Frost. I won't use his name, even though he probably wouldn't mind. So I become friendly with him. And he's sitting in 656 without a yarmulke, which is a little striking because he went to yeshiva and he should have known better. So I called the waitress over and I asked her to find one of those like waitress trays. and the biggest yarmulke she could find and walk it over to his dinner party and hand it to him. Now, Tamar was not thrilled. She's like, what are you doing? You can't do that. I said, no, it'll be fine. You get the joke. It'll all be good. But you're right. And it used to, and not anymore. It's like, that's like a little, it's like a little more
yeah.
lax today. He did put the yarmulke on when I sent it to him.
Did he know it was you?
Oh, I was smiling, looking at him. I want him to know it was me. That was the gag.
Yeah.
And he got the message. Okay. But yeah, I mean, you're walking down the street, right? There are plenty of wonderful people in this neighborhood. Again, when I was growing up, you wouldn't have found it. So it just, but so where does it come from? So then he backtracks and he says, nevertheless, there's nothing that's out there in the minhag verse, right, if you will, that doesn't have some hint in the Torah. Right, which means we're going to try and find a hint to it. We'll try and find some value, but you can never get past that opening line, right? Which is not on the books. Now, it doesn't mean, mechitza is not on the books. Mechitza in shul. You won't find it in Shulchan Aruch. That is the defining feature of Orthodox shuls, if you will, a mechitza.
But don't they have a mechitza? I've mentioned it before, like in the Gemara about the height.
Yeah, in the Beis Hamikdash.
But separating out the women from the men.
Right. So there's a model, but that's not shul. It's not davening, and they're not. It's in a shiva house. You don't actually, right? We don't make a mechitza. We just shift somebody here, shift somebody there. But it's a halacha in shul. It's almost like a harig val yavor today. You can't think about not having one in shul, but it's not in the Shulchan Aruch. So the fact that it's not in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But I wouldn't compare wearing a yarmulke to having a mechitza in shul. So where do you find such a source in the Chumash? That's already a more interesting question. Very hard pressed. I wouldn't have guessed it before I saw this.
You never heard the joke.
How do you know that Yaakov? Yes.
How do you know Jews should wear it?
Right. Right, but Yetzi Yaakov mi Beersheva, Yaakov went out with Yaakov grab that yarmulke. That was Jay Lisker's favorite joke growing up. Yes, it's a great joke, but a real source, right? So he says there is a prohibition for Kohanim to be Peru'e Rosh, which literally means to have long hair, unkempt hair. And in some of the Rishonim, they read back that includes covering one's head, that the Kohanim had, mitznefet to cover their heads, and that's where he tries to find the source, but that's hard. Right, what he's trying to do is establish the value of the yarmulke and the head covering from somewhere in the Chumash. It's hard, but that's his best guess. But then he says as follows, okay, and this is I'll read as I scan it. I'll read it in English. It's not on the source sheet. He says, "Le'inyan halacha l'maaseh," right? For what's practical, the argument is from one end of the extreme to the other. Some people say it's amidas chasidus, which means it's a nice thing to do. You don't have to do it. It's a nice thing to do, right? Some people say, right, that it's not even 4 amos. There's an absolute prohibition in walking without your head covering even a step, right? There are people who have, right? You have your yarmulke at your nightstand and your nagelwasser right by your bed. And you trip over it and it gets wet and no. Okay. Right. Some people say it's only when you're walking, but not when you're sitting. And some people say it's only outdoors and not indoors. Right. And I don't know how you get a formal prohibition out of that. He doesn't explain that. He just says it's all over the place. I would imagine the only way to get a formal prohibition is to say that once it becomes accepted, then it's like a vow, and a vow has a Torah source. But that's a cheat, right? That's
By a community or in general?
Either one. We can
that
have
here would
communal
be okay.
vows. Yes, we can have individual vows. We can have communal vows. Once something is traditionally accepted, it gets passed down. That's a trick that sometimes the rabbis use, but it's not a very good trick, right? It's cheating.
But circumstances change also. The situation we're in right now, some people don't feel comfortable anymore walking around with the yarmulke.
So, okay, so that is, you're already assuming you should, and then the question of the exceptions. Right, I'll tell you a funny story about Rav Lichtenstein. So when he went to interview for Harvard, for a graduate degree in literature, so there was a question at that time of whether, you went on your interview with a yarmulke or not. Like, was that a good idea? I actually heard Rav Schechter tell this story, and he went to the Rav, and I forget the answer. That Rav Schechter said he could have gone in an Indian dress, and he would have gotten into Harvard. It would have been okay, right? But there, that was a question. Like, at what point is it danger, or do you lose a job? But that's already a secondary question. You have you should do it, but what do we pit against it to override it, right? So that's a fair, 100% fair, but doesn't speak to the obligation per se. It speaks to the exception to the practice, as it were. And then he says, and this is certainly true in the Ashkenaz world, right? In the later generations, it has certainly become much more customary, he says, but he says, Niskabel Isur Gilui Harosh, right? That the Jewish community has accepted this as a prohibition, and you see it as a symbol of being an observant person, and there is logic as well. And I think that's an accurate assessment of the Ashkenaz world. Again, if you went to the Haredi Syrian world, they have adopted the Ashkenaz entirely. But yes, I mean, each community is certainly different. And one would imagine in Syria it was harder to wear a yarmulke and be safe. And then the community comes over. Although I doubt that in Poland it was all that great to wear a yarmulke.
But they wore other hats.
Yeah, they wore the other little hats, right? So, but again, he's certainly right that at some level, wearing in the Ashkenaz world, wearing a yarmulke has become a symbol of your association with Orthodoxy, and has become pretty much certainly an established custom, if not more. Where is it? Why? What's the purpose? What's the reason? So here you actually have two sources in the Gemara. So if you look at the source sheet, it's only two sources that you have in the Gemara, but they're good, and they give you a sense as to why we're doing them and what it means, and hopefully we think about it while we do it. We don't just go through our road actions. And all right, the first source is in the Gemara in Shabbos, at the very, very end of Shabbos. Kuf Nun Vav Hamid Beis is 156b. That's actually a strange story, which probably deserves more time than I'm going to give it, but it's a strange story, right? The Gemara has a discussion about what's called Ein Mazel Yisrael, which means that we are not subject to the fate of astronomy, constellations, whatever. We have a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and we're not bound by the fate of what is called Mazel, right? Ein Mazel Yisrael means we are not bound by the constellations. So with Rav Nachman by Yitzchak Nami, we learn from Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, he also holds Ein Mazel Yisrael, right? The Ime the Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, his mother, right? Amrile Kidelai, right? He was told by these, whatever they are, here it says astrologers, but the spirit peoples and who can read the signs, right? Brich gan vahava, right? That your son, right, is going to be a ganef, right? Could you imagine? Poor Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, Gemara fame. Somebody went and told his mother, your son's going to be a thief. I saw it in the stars. I read your, what do they call that? The horoscope. Thank you. I saw your horoscope, and he's going to be a thief. Right? So lo shavkete geluye reisha. So she, being the good Jewish mother that she was, didn't want her son to become a thief. That'd be a shanda, that'd be terrible. Right? He'd have to go away. That's what we call it. That's what we call it these days. Nobody goes to jail. We just go away. We go away. It's plague of the Jewish community. We go away. Terrible. Okay. But she wanted to protect her son, and she said you can't go out, right, with your head uncovered. So Amrile, Kasi Reisha, where you should cover your head, right, that you should have the aim of the fear of heaven upon you and daven for mercy. Right? So that's what she tells him. Now, she doesn't tell him that he's going to be a thief, and that's why she's doing this, but she wants him to be a good God-fearing person. So if you have a head covering, right? You will have fear of the heavens, right? Because you remind you that something is above you, and you should daven for mercy. But lo haviyada amai kamerle. He had no idea. Like, what's my crazy mother? Right? What's my crazy mother, Jewish mother, doing to me? Because probably nobody else covered their hair at that point, covered their head at that point. So Yoma Havi Yosef Kagares Tues Dikla, right? So one day he is right. He's sitting. He's under the palm tree, right? Nafel glima me'alayu reisha dali anya right chaze dikla. Right, his head covering fell off, and the Yetzer overtook him. And Salik, he went up, Paske the Kibura Bishine, and he chomps into some of those dates with his teeth because his head covering came off and his fear of heaven lost, and he just wanted those dates so badly. And it turns out the astrologer was right. He became a Ganath by stealing the dates. Right, that's a weird story. I grant you it's a weird story, but what's the point? The point is that as long as his head was covered and he was thinking about heaven above him, he wasn't going to be a thief. Okay, that's Gemara number 1. Gemara number 2, right, which maybe has, right, maybe the same, maybe not. Let's see what we think. Let's read the second Gemara in Kiddushin and tell me whether you think it's the same point or a different point. Okay, and you have the English there as well. I'll read the Aramaic. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Asur la'adam shi'ahalech arba amos bekoma zakufa. A person cannot walk, right, straight, standing. Right, koma zakufa means literally like straight, but with arrogance. Shenemar malo kol haaretz kvodo, because the whole world is full of Hashem's presence. You can't be arrogant. The whole world is full of Hashem's presence. You got to have some humility. Right, Rav Huna Breder Rav Shua Lamaski Arba Amos Begili Harosh. Right, Rav Huna the son of Rav Shua, he wouldn't walk 4 cubits without his head covered. Amar Shechina Lama'ala Meroshi. Right, the Shechina is above my head. Is this the same or different from the previous Gemara?
It's different.
How is it different?
Well,
I think
the first one, first of all, I have a question with the first one because the Gemara first says that Israel doesn't have mazel, but then it seems like
yes, and then he became a thief.
and then if you don't wear yarmulke, then you are subject to mazel. So it's almost
okay, but that's why I said we're not going to really. I don't want.
Right.
We have another tshuva left to go.
But in any case, right, forgetting about that question,
that's beyond the scope of the shear, not just the podcast.
right?
You can do that too.
So the first one is you're doing something to protect yourself from evil things. Maybe it's the astrologers, maybe it's something else. The second one is just a behavior. In other words, it's haughty to walk around without a yarmulke because Hashem is everywhere. So wherever we walk, we have to be cognizant of the fact that He's around us. The first one is just for protection. The second one is a behavior.
Okay, Eve, no, go, and then I'll.
Okay, I don't see that the first one's for protection. His mother says, do this so that you can keep your fear of heaven on you. And that's what she was protecting him, was the fear
Right,
of
but
heaven.
they're connected, right? Meaning it's
to remind him to be.
well, clearly from the context of the Gemara, she doesn't want him to sin. Right? It is a way to avoid sinning by remembering God. Right. But
So protection from sinning.
I mean, that's
Maybe.
right.
Except she didn't tell him that. So.
Again, there's a lot of questions. It's a very good
right.
story. We could spend an hour on that story. It's a great story.
Okay, so say he knew, then he.
Well, it sounds like he doesn't know.
Sounds like he doesn't know.
Because the Gemara says he doesn't know.
The point she's making to him, though, is it's a reminder to have.
Yeah,
fear of heaven.
so in that
It's
sense,
not-
yes, Eve
so
is
the
right
fear
that
of
the
heaven is what is protecting him from
Right.
sin. not-
fear of heaven, though, is also different than right. Maloch haaretz kvodo might just be an appreciation of God in the world
That's true.
and some humility because Hashem is in the world. But that, right, from both of those sources, what you get is either it reminds you to stay Jewish, right, and not, right, if you're sitting on the plane, you're the guy with the kosher meal, which you probably don't eat anyways. But right, there is something of that, But even more importantly, I think the second source speaks to me more. Right? It's a question of humility and recognizing Hashem in the world, and that should affect all of your behavior in the positive, not just avoiding the negative. Yes.
Story number two, it's only when walking. It's not when sitting. Story number one,
Yes.
he was sitting and it fell off, and then
100%, which is where you can parse out all those other things, sitting, walking, for Amos, this, that. But none of this is written. Again, these are two stories in the Gemara. The Gemara knows how to say something is usher or something is commanded. We know how to say it, right? It's full of it.
Yep.
Right. I mean, they knew the language, no hesitation at all, right? If they want you to do something, they'll tell you mechuyev, right? You're obligated. Here, there are stories about individuals, somebody's mother trying to protect his son. Right. This guy clearly is the exception to the rule. Right? Nowhere does it say chayav adam lachasos es rosho, etc., or some formulation like that. It just doesn't exist. But if you want to appreciate the custom, so you look to these two sources, and hopefully it informs the custom. Yes.
I don't know, because I don't wear a yarmulke, but I would
That's true.
say, I'm gonna speak for Jeff, but I would say 9 times out of 10, it becomes rote. You don't even realize
Yes.
you're wearing it until maybe you're put into a situation where you could feel uncomfortable.
I think sadly, most things become rote.
That's true.
That's a larger issue. Right. I was talking actually to Yossi Bick last week, and I told him he won't mind that I use his name because he's talking about me. But I told him that of all the tefillos that we've been saying, right, you daven hard all the time. Those 3 mishaberachs that I make twice a day, every day, I literally say with kavana every time I say them. I sadly cannot say that about other tefillos. I daven Shema Esrei 3 times a day. Your head goes in, your head goes out. Sometimes it's good, sometimes some of it's good. Those 3, I literally manage every time I say them. I know what I'm saying. I think about what I'm saying. I mean it. Right? It's sincere, but that's a rarity. Right? Most things. So it doesn't mean that the value isn't there, or it doesn't mean that. It just means that as human beings, things that you do all the time become rote, and that's not so bad either. Right? Certainly in terms of tefillah, right? In terms of davening, the fact that I daven Shachris Mincha Marav puts my day in a spiritual context. Even if my Shemona Esrei, maybe my Shachris is better than my Marav, and my Marav is better than my Mincha, or they all stink one day. I could be really exhausted. They all might stink, right? You daven on a plane, your Shemona Esrei is terrible. It's terrible. And I never get up I'll sit in my seat, and it's terrible. Okay, but every day there's a spiritual routine. So there's value in that also, even if you're 100% right. How many times do we really think Shekhinah is above me? But it's a uniform. I get up in the morning, I put on my yarmulke, right? You go, you brush your teeth, you come out, you put on your tzitzis, you make your bracha. It gives you it's how you start your day. Start your day in a spiritual way. Even if I'm, when it's dark outside, and I'm not a morning person so much. Do I really think about what my tzitzis mean to me? And but I got them. They're on. So there is a value in terms of yarmulke. Also, even if you're 1,000% right, we don't always focus. All right. Let's move to the second tshuva, and this is it's a 1-pager here, but it's kind of fascinating, right? So the question is asked as follows. Sometimes when you ask a question, you get beat down on the way you ask a question. This guy's getting beat down. Okay. The question is as follows: for those who are machmir with regard to a woman's singing voice, from what age should we start instructing our children, right, our daughters, about this prohibition? Is there a difference between hearing a voice in person live and hearing a voice on the radio or on taklitim or cassette tapes? I don't think they had CDs when he was writing these tshuvos. He certainly didn't have digital music. All right, then he wants to know, from what age should you start educating young girls with tznius dress? And that's like a lot of different topics.
What age should we start educating young boys with proper thinking.
Okay, I'm just reading the tshuva. I didn't make the question up.
That's my first
I
question.
don't-
Why would you-
I'm just, it's on the page. We're
Yes,
sticking to the
no,
page.
that's not-
Maybe they could be
Only with you.
successful in that direction.
Okay, so what he does is, right, he takes the questioner to task, not the way Eve does, but in a different direction, right? He says, Kol Isha is not a chumrah, right? It's not an optional stringency that one wishes they take upon themselves. It is a din gamor, it is a halacha. Now, what's fascinating is, and again, this would take, I am trying to stick just like to the chuvos and go through it. It gives us structure and pushes us through. There are some excellent articles out on this topic. Look at the source that he quotes in his tshuva, I have it for you on the page, as the source that hearing a woman's singing voice is an absolute prohibition.
Doing Shema.
During Shema, right? Yesh li zaher mishmiat kol zemer isha b'shat kriyas Shema, right? You shouldn't hear a woman singing at the time of Shema, right? Because Shema is the time that you accept the yoke of heaven, the love of mitzvos, and you want to have the clearest, purest mind that you can during Shema, right? That seems to actually make some sense. Aval kol, right? The Rama says, ishto, right? Even your wife, right? Even though that might be, let's say your wife's voice does something for you, it's just a nice voice, it's still inappropriate when you're saying Shema, right? There's a time and a place for everything. And having sensual thoughts when you're saying Kriyas Shema is not appropriate, no matter who you're having them about, right? Even if that relationship is a permitted relationship to you. Aval kol haragil bo eno erva. It's a voice that you're used to, so that's not erva. That's the source that he quotes, which is fascinating because that source is limited to Kriyas Shema, right? So I'll give you the 30-second version. There are two sources in the Gemara. One talks about singing voices during Kriyas Shema. The other talks about actually spoken voices at all time, like Saudi Arabia, like burqa it up and I don't know, gag and I don't even know, like get a muzzle and right. And the question is, how do you?
Dress Miriam, who led the women in song?
No,
The guys all run across
they were in the
yard.
back. They were far away. They didn't hear. Nobody heard them.
They didn't run back
behind
across.
pizza.
They were behind. Nobody heard them. Pastor Shah. Heresy. We have now branded Steve a heretic. Okay. Again. But he wears the label proudly, so that's okay. He doesn't seem to be taking any offense. For those of you who can't see Steve's face, he seems to be taking it well. Right, so there is an entire discussion in the Rishonim as to how do you square those two sources. The first article was actually an article by Rabbi Saul Berman, but nobody really cares because they don't think he's, from. It's a brilliant article. He's a brilliant guy. He's a very firm guy, but nobody took it seriously because he was just, Saul Berman in the, but it's a very good article. It's worth reading if somebody wants. That was the first article. The second article is an article by Ramosha Lichtenstein on like girls singing during army events and whether religious soldiers should run out. And he goes through the analysis and decides that you should stay in because it's somber and it's whatever it is they're singing. Hatikvah, they're singing. And Avi's Tekes, they sang the Golani theme song. And one guy in his unit, and they all made fun of him, like would get up and run out as fast as he could because they didn't want to hear the women sing. But like he'd make a whole show of it and they all laughed at him because they laughed at him because I don't know. Okay. Right, but Moshe Lichtenstein has a great article where he goes through these issues. He decides from the source about Kriyas Shema that it's an absolute prohibition. He is right that the overwhelming majority of Achronim do see it as a absolute prohibition. In the Rishonim, it is a much more interesting conversation, right? Rishonim is, let's say, the year 1000 to 1400, 1400 to 1900 is the Achronim. In that earlier period, there's real discussion how to square those two sources in the Gemara. By the time the Achronim come around, they're just blanket answering it, and that's more or less become the default position, unless there are exceptions. right? We actually wouldn't let Ruth Hyman sing the national anthem. I'm not sure that counted, but okay. You know, all right, listen, Shul's got to follow the rules, right? Shul has to follow the accepted rules. Right. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
The answer seems to focus that the male should be careful from hearing the women singing, but the women can sing.
So he thinks that it goes both ways, but yes, that's another distinction to be made, right? But like the Elon plays, the Buria plays, best thing ever. Fathers can't come. Shucks. It's like skirt league basketball. I love skirt league basketball. It's my favorite. You're not allowed to go. I do go to the baseball. I do go to the softball games because I'm allowed. Don't ask me hard questions.
Because it's sunny.
I don't know, but I'm not allowed the basketball games, but I am allowed the softball games. Maybe I don't run as hard. I don't know. This is what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do. All right, so and therefore I think he's certainly representing the majority of the Achronim in his position, despite the fact that he gives us a source from Kriya Shema.
Did the Achronim come up with sources why they did that, or they just wanted?
Well,
to
yeah,
hunt it
I mean,
down?
it's a particular reading of the Gemaras, right? If you square them in that particular way, but in the Rishonim, there's a much more robust discussion as to how you deal. Right? Is it only limited to Kriyat Shema, which, right, makes sense, right? Meaning, if Eve is right that we can all control ourselves and not be animals, which is one of the points that Ramosha makes, which is interesting, right? The assumption that any voice at any time sends a male into a sexual frenzy, right, means that all men are just barbaric animals who have no self-control of anything at all. Which is maybe not the nicest way to look at us. but okay. Right, so that's certainly
credit.
What was that?
I want to give you all a little more credit.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Right, but that is the strict position on Kol Isha does make assumptions about male behavior and self-control. And that's a piece, I don't know if I don't remember, I haven't read Rabbi Berman's article, could be 3 decades since I read it, so I don't remember what's in it as well. Ramosha's a more recent article, he does speak about it at the end. So that certainly is a point worth considering. Interestingly, in terms of the radio, right? So first thing he says is during Shema, you probably shouldn't listen to men sing either. I mean, Shema in general is one issue of Kol Isha. With other issues, you don't be distracted that's why we cover our eyes. You want to say Shema, you want to focus on what you're saying, and it's important and accept the yoke of heaven, right? We shouldn't hear anyone clamoring. What about the radio? So he makes an interesting distinction, right? And that is, do you know who's singing or not? And again, I'm not saying this. I'm just giving you his perspective. It's not a survey. This is his chuvos.
You know the person personally, or
No.
do you know the person?
Do you know
you
who they
identify who the
are and
singer
what they
is?
look like?
Oh, okay.
Those are you mentioning?
Yeah, right. Meaning,
Visualizing the person.
right. Are you visualizing the person? So if you don't know who they are, right? So that is his distinction, right? His distinction is, right, whether you know who they are or not, which is actually it's a reasonable distinction. I don't think it has to be. I'll tell you another great tidbit. This is from Mark Shapiro, Professor Mark Shapiro. He has some fascinating stuff. I don't remember which book it is that he writes this in, but he says that Rav Ovadia Yosef, right, a blessed memory, used to listen to a non-Jewish Egyptian female singer, something like Kulthum or some variation of that, she was a very popular Egyptian singer. And Rav Ovadia Yosef in his youth used to love listening to her on tape. So Rav Ovadia clearly disagreed with Chaim David Halevi, or he's going to hell in sin. No, Chas v'shalom, right? Chas v'shalom, and Rav Ovadia disagreed and thought that, like, listening to music on tape did not violate the prohibition. But it's not an unreasonable distinction for him to make, right? And these are the issues that you're facing. right? Do I know what she looks like or not? At some level does make sense. The very last thing he says, he is an advocate. We did not do this, or Tamar didn't do this. I'm not in charge of my kids, but truth. Right, he is an advocate of chinuch in dress from a very early age. He doesn't say how early, but it seems very early. I don't think Tamar did that with our kids.
In dress,
Skirts,
but
pants.
as opposed to not singing out loud.
Yes, he switched at the end to dress. And again, that is, I don't think that that's his opinion. He's entitled to opinion like everybody else. But that's not a halacha, right? In the chinuch, you really try and figure out what's appropriate, what ages, and what works. And I think we can have different opinions on that, and children can be different, right? Each kid is different, and parents are different. But it's in the tshuva. I figured I'm going to skip it. So that again, that's the last thing that he says. Right, Migil Rach Bioter, from a very early age.
So in other words, woman singing will cause her to wear pants.
Possibly.
Okay.
Well,
Or they can't sing properly if they're wearing skirts. There's something.
No, I'm not sure why they're connected. I'm
Yeah.
just,
Yes,
I'm
it
presenting the
doesn't necessarily
facts
make
as they
sense.
are on the paper. Again, that you can debate with, but again, so happy to take any questions. Those are our two tshuvos for today. Questions, anybody? No questions. All right, with that, I wish you a happy Nittelnacht. Good night to all. Yeah. Or something like that.